So the Bouddi Foundation for the Arts is dedicated to supporting and encouraging young artists on the Central Coast of New South Wales. And this is actually what Peter was alluding to us earlier during his session. So it does this by raising funds from which it awards grants and scholarships to young creative people. In 2021, Andrew Menken was awarded a foundation grant together with Allen Unwin Award for Creative Writing. So let's welcome Andrew, who's going to be in conversation with Patrick Gallagher, Chairman of Allen Unwin Publishing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. It's great to be here with the winner of this year's Allen Unwin Literary Award. The award started last year, and there weren't many entrants early days, but luckily there was one exceptionally good winner who is using the grant currently to help her through a creative writing course at UTS, which already had some work published. This year, the word had started to spread, and we had over a dozen entrants with some exceptionally good people. In fact, two of the shortlisters have had supplementary grants from the Bouddi Foundation. Now, how many of you read poetry? I wonder. Oh yes, yes. But I'm sure that all of you occasionally come across it, whether it's a poem you read in a paper, or on the internet, or even on the back of a cornflakes packet. And you think quite often, doesn't that say a lot? Doesn't a few words say a lot? And for instance, last night I got caught in the rain and taken off my very wet shoes, and my wife looked down and saw me with a pair of rather daggy sandals over socks, yes, over socks. And she said, I grow old, I shall wear the bottom of my trousers rolled. And the love song of J.R. Prufrock tells you more about old age in one poem than a multitude of novels and theses. Poetry is a wonderful thing, as Andrew has discovered and is discovering. We'll ask him to read some poetry shortly, but first, Andrew, tell us how you first got interested and started reading and then writing poetry.
Alright, Patrick, well, when I was younger, I wasn't totally into creative writing just yet, and it might be a little bit controversial and some people think he's a poet and just a songwriter, but I was a pretty big Bob Dylan fan. I came across a song
He's a Nobel laureate.
Yes, and that's where the controversy lies. But I came across a song that was blaring. We were up camping in Treachery, and my mate had his old Mazda 626, and it was blaring, changing the guards. And then from then on, I sort of knew in a couple of years, once I strip away the music, it's going to be about just the poetry. And then I came across a couple of poets. I started creative writing. I started my undergrad degree at Newcastle Uni. And I came across Allen Ginsberg, Sylvia Plath, and Sexton, and then that kind of just cemented the beginning of that journey. So I can thank Bob Dylan for that, who I still listen to every day, I guess.
So any other sort of favourite poets?
Yeah, so I know a lot of Australians tend to gravitate towards American poets. It's just the culture thing. By W.S. Merwin, I don't know if anyone here has heard of him. He has a very good collection called The Shadow of Sirius. And that was probably one of the collections I connected with the most. And as for Australian poets, the work of Robert Adamson, we were discussing that prior, he writes very intimately about the Hawkesbury River. Les Murray, you can't go past Les. Yeah, and a variety of poets. Philip Larkin, the British poet, I love everything by him. But yeah, I think if I had to name a favourite poem, which I hope everyone goes out after this and looks up, is a sonnet called At North Farm by John Ashbery. And Ashbery's quite an obscure poet, but yeah, it's definitely one of my favourites.
Okay, so At North Farm.
At North Farm, yeah.
We'll always try to remember that.
Yeah.
So, what place do you think poetry has in the world, and in Australia particularly today?
Yeah, it's a difficult question. I've thought about this question for a while. And I think it's something that, well, my teacher and supervisor, David Musgrave, once told me that you're just born a poet. You can't really force yourself to become creative or become a creative writer. But I think it remains important to the people who are actively engaged in it. And for an ancient art form like poetry, I don't think that'll ever go away. I think that'll remain. But yeah, more generally, I think it's an attempt to recover, reconfigure and reshape the universal via the particular. So even though at times it may not be as popular as novel or as prose writing, I think, yeah, for poets and people who read poetry, it's always going to remain vitally important.
It's poetry, it's hung in there, hasn't it?
It has, yeah. even in Australia. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, as a publisher, I have to confess, it's a very hard area to publish. I always say, perhaps a bit cruelly, poets should be selling their wares on street corners. But you may be able to do better than that, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully.
You've already had some interest from a poetry publisher.
Yeah, well, so I'm in a very serendipitous spot because my supervisor, David Musgrave, I just mentioned, you guys may be familiar with Punch and Watman Publishing. They publish the majority of Australia's poetry. So when I finish my PhD, hopefully I'll have a collection out under David's label. Yeah,
good.
As long as I don't, provoke him or anger him.
Maybe
Poets get pretty angry sometimes.
maybe we'll see you here again in a few years' time on the table out there signing.
Yeah, that'd be excellent. Yeah.
Anyway, what are you going to read to us?
Okay, so a lot of my poetry deals with, I mentioned Adamson before, and what I'm doing in my PhD revolves around poetry of place. So I'm from Budgewoi, if you guys have heard of Budgewoi, I'm down the other end of the coast. So my work focuses on just imaginative explorations of the built environment and natural environment and kind of, it's lyrical poetry in a sense. So this poem is called What Would Jessie Do? Across the rusted railings of Budgewoi Bridge, those rails on your left when walking south, for fish and chips or a schooner at the pub. The 4 words, what would Jessie do, appear if you stand at the right distance and squint. Some days the blotchy block lettering is barely discernible. Sediment settling to the bottom of a suspended steel lake. No, I don't know any Jessie who lives in Budgewoi, and I'm shocked graffiti artists around here are familiar with Charles Sheldon. White speckles along the footpath suggest leaky spray cans, or a shaky novice hand and stops short, where the crack in the concrete fans out like a fern to form little knots of varicose veins. Oh, the question mark. Maybe Jessie considers them redundant. Maybe its omission makes a statement. Maybe by chance a cop car's approach startled him so much that he jumped off the bridge without checking punctuation and slunk away soaking wet down ocean or up boomerang. He was likely confined to bed with pelican itch until deep pains of creative doubt hospitalised his vocation as a graffitist. Even non-believers believe such a godless pun secures Jessie eternity in hell for evoking Christ in Budgewoi just to displace him. Yes, I know council is halfway through putting its final coat on the northbound railing and must cross soon to the other side. A decade will pass between the skate park and caravan park before you ask, what did Jessie do? Okay, this is one I wrote. I only finished it probably a few days ago, but driving from Budgewoi here, there's a lot of potholes, so I think it took on its own relevancy as I finished it up a couple of days ago. So this is called Lachrymose Sunday Driver. The radio's off and the windows are up, and I'm crying behind the wheel of my Kia sedan. My Kia was made in Korea, and the knowledge of this compels me to think of someone who may be crying in Korea. But, as it turns out, I'm not someone in Seoul or Pyongyang, I'm someone in peri-urban Australia, a silly man who cries behind the wheel of his Kia sedan. The powder blue Isuzu ute ahead of me negotiates the same patch of liquefied freeway, as if it was stuck on a giant hellish treadmill which means I'm also potentially stuck on a giant hellish treadmill. The sun's endless self-immolation continues amid the indifferent clouds, while the tongues of cows in Morisset work over mouthfuls of grass or flick at the breeze. The aircon's off and my petrol light's on, and I'm far from comfortable in my own skin. My lips twitch like Spitfire grubs, and each hand, with its bulging veins and downy hairs, is a haphazard system of tunnels passing beneath a sparse forest of colourless trees. I'm once again entering the Central Coast, where almost all our potholed roads are stalked by SUVs housing mobile speed cameras, and those Sunday drivers whose crying borders on laughter as they roll into service stations behind the wheels of their family sedans. Thank you. One more. Yep. So Margaret, who was emailing me, requested that I read this poem. It's entitled Blackfish, and it's based on a real encounter. I don't think I could make it up if I tried. And this is about Budgewoi Lake. So there's an epigraph to this poem from a poem by Les Murray called Equanimity, and it reads, "Almost beneath notice, as attainable as gravity, it is a continuous recovering moment." Blackfish. An old man floundering in the dew-soaked grass beside the footpath calls out to me as I approach. "Hey young fella, could you help us get back up?" Panting and on all fours, he explains that his bung knees have become death traps in later life, and how he stumbled venturing down near the lake's edge. "You know when your knees hurt after your first footy training session back? Mine have felt that way for 3 years." I take his hand but misjudge its strength and watch him fall further forward. Now I'm contributing to his pain. "You're pulling me over. I reckon I can crawl up to that bench and then," a sudden and protracted period of coughing, "I'll be fine." In lieu of a cane or walking frame, I kneel and offer my arched back. "No, grab me shoulder. Not that one, this one." The rich smell of tobacco as he gingerly rises is strangely comforting, like the gravelly voice of a favourite uncle. This is what I came for. Greenweed, the first green weed of the season." A dripping wet clump of matted algae swallows his hand and is striking in the pale light of early autumn. Blackfish, good stuff for Captain Blackfish. Macca the Jack Russell has been patient long enough and would like to resume our morning walk, so he kicks out his tousled hind legs in frustration. The fisherman foresees his own demise, or soberly reflects. "If I slip in waist-deep water, that's it, I'm done, finished." He vigorously brushes dirt from his tracksuit pants and regards me with more indifference than a shark. When I say I always return via the bike track and will check on him again. "I'll be gone, thanks. I'll be gone, no need." Nearing home under an opaquely grey sky, I stand with Macca at the edge of the lake and shatter its pervading stillness, after announcing, without good reason, the first green weed of the season. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Andrew.
Thanks, Patrick.
I hope we'll all be inspired to read a little more poetry, and wish you the very best of luck in your career.
Thanks a lot.
Very quickly,